let the sunlight fool you. Things live out in those woods, day as well as night. Just at night, there ain't nothing gonna save you. Can't see where you're going, but it can see. It knows what it wants, and it's gonna take you.
Just time to celebrate what we have and what we already love. The Hazing, Biozombie, The Beyond, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, House by the Cemetery, Jason X, The Night of the Living Dead, Captive Wild Woman, Decad, The Empty Man, Exorcist 3, Cat People, Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, The Haunting of Julia, Hereditary, Black Sunday. My number 9 film of all time is Ringu. Now, Koji Suzuki's novel is something I read afterwards, but I have to say that my definitive version of the story, and there's been many versions of the Ringu story, is definitely that first Japanese theatrical film. I since went back and watched the made-for-television movie, which is extremely cheap looking. It's not scary at all, but it contains all the elements of the novel, including the ones that were smartly excised for the film adaptation. I also watched Ring Virus out of Korea, and I watched the American films. I think every incarnation of Ring gets some things right, some less than others, but none of them capture the sheer impenetrable dread that comes from that original film. It's one of those tragedies that an American remake has basically defined what Ring is for an entire generation, really before Ringu really had a chance in America to take hold. And a key reason that that's such a tragedy is that the original film is a damn near perfect experience. It opens with a ton of dread. Ostensibly it's a scene about two girls talking about an urban legend, which sounds really familiar, right? We've all seen that movie, but in reality, the way it plays out, there's this dark cloud over the scene that is it's tactile. You can feel the dread. The performances are really good. They're not performances in a very theatrical sense, right? Like you couldn't do those types of demure performances on a stage and expect people in the back row to get it. But what's so great is they understood film could do nuance. And that's something that the horror genre has a problem with. Normally, horror films go very big in how they present everything, simply because they don't trust that the audience is completely going to get it unless it's loud and fast. But here, we're allowed to have a conversation between two schoolgirls set the tone for the film. And while the rest of the movie does not revolve around these characters, it's an inciting incident that plays well. Now, there's this trope in horror fiction, whereas you start with a introductory chapter that doesn't really connect to the narrative, but shows the effects of the villain, how powerful the villain is, and then that is how you set up stakes for your characters that you introduce properly. Then this is not what they're doing here, and that's the brilliance: is that you don't see the violence, you don't see anything really. You see two girls discussing an urban legend, and then the discovery of one of the girls' bodies, which is a horrifying sight, but the violence is missing. You're left to imagine what could have happened here. That's a really strong setup for a film that's going to be a slow burn in some ways, but never stops putting disturbing imagery in front of you. And that's it. This is a film that's filled with the uncanny. The videotape is so much more effective than any found footage film ever could be. Just simple images of a woman with long black hair combing her hair in front of a mirror, which glitches in a way that's simply impossible. Images of a well from inside. You're getting just fragments of a narrative that are easy enough to put together. Don't mind. It's not a complex idea, but you're dealing with the emotions of the story rather than the story itself. It's a story about a mother who's trying to prevent her son from falling victim to this curse. What is that curse? Once again, we fall into a very familiar horror reoccurring theme, which is the broken family. She's a single mom. The father figure is missing. Sadako's father, of course, murdered her, right? So we much like The Exorcist, we're dealing, and many other films, not just The Exorcist, but it seems like everyone's talking about The Exorcist right now. But like The Exorcist, it's a film in which missing father figures are an important part of the structure of the film. Nothing makes a child more vulnerable than missing one of their parents. And the convention of horror films to feature female leads makes the male, the dad, missing the more obvious choice. But here it's even more important because since the main antagonist of the film is female, having a male ultimately die horrifically during its climax has a kind of rudimentary symmetry to the story, which wouldn't happen if the genders were swapped of any of the characters. It works specifically because of the gender dynamics. It's also a film that really embraces folklore and psychology on equal footing. And I think that's a really, really amazing aspect of Ringu, is that the idea of a father who killed his daughter because he believes she has superhuman powers is really shocking. The fact that we're explicitly shown that she does is almost incidental because there's a tragedy at the heart of the story, as there are in all good ghost stories. All good ghost stories are not about bad people who died and are still haunting you. That doesn't work. What's more powerful is when a tragic figure dies and something happens in the death process that turns this resulting spirit malicious. You know, that malignancy of the passage from life to death, like the barrier itself can turn an unsettled soul. And the movie does all this without really discussing it. In the late 90s, it was already the case that VHS was fading as a format. So a VHS tape in a seedy hotel is a strongly discordant idea even then. Today, it would make no sense. Back then, it was possible, but already it seemed odd, a little out of date, a little behind the times. And isn't that what a ghost is? The ghosts are our ideas from yesterday, our sins from yesterday. The idea that when you put in a cassette tape, a VHS tape, into the deck that was unmarked, you didn't know what you were going to get. You could see anything, right? Your worst fears could be projected onto that videotape, which is quite literally what the film suggests has happened. That's a really powerful idea because it says, as people, as viewers of this movie, we now do not trust the film because we're importing all of our anxieties onto the film, just as is happening in the film. I love Ringu. I first discovered it based on word of mouth by some people I really trusted that said, hey, there's this thing that's changing Asian horror right now coming out of Japan called Ringu. And I searched, and there was a little import video store in Old Bridge, New Jersey called Poker Industries, and they came up with a VCD of it. I didn't realize the VCD did not have subtitles, but I bought it anyway. And I ended up not watching the film when I first purchased it because it didn't have subtitles. And even the opening scene, which I did watch, had this deep sense of dread, even though I couldn't understand any of the dialogue. But I decided I wanted to hold off because this seemed to be something real. And its reputation as a transformative film for the genre was really strong. So I didn't want to waste my first view on something I couldn't fully appreciate. Within just a couple months, I found a version of the film on VHS that did have subtitles, albeit they were slightly cut off. I could still read and I could still tell what was going on. That watch was actually the one thing I always claim the horror films don't have to be that people expect them to be. And that's scary. Not just scary. Ringu is terrifying. It's effective. It's wonderfully neo-Gothic, but yet has a very modern sensibility. And at the same time, again, feels like we haven't quite caught up with the times. It's about the modern world reflecting on the world of 10 years ago, which is a really interesting way to present a film about a tragedy, right? Because grief, what is grief but memory of bad events? What is the videotape but a recording of bad events? It it all works so brilliantly as a meta piece, and yet I would not call it a meta film in the way you'd call Scream or Nightmare Concert or any of those films that usually get thrown around as deeply meta films. It's commenting on the art form and about why we find ourselves full of anxiety with these films without ever having to point out what it's doing to us. And I think that's a stronger way to present this material. In fact, I would say that this is the mature version of something like Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which is kind of the juvenile version. And it's cool if you like that film. I don't really. I kind of think it's dull. But this hits on all notes, and it hits notes that you've never experienced before. At the same time, much of the imagery of the ghost kind of does feel classical instantaneously, even though you might not have been familiar with the classic representation of a Far East ghost. The moment you saw Sadako in all her glory, you knew that you were seeing something that was going to be etched into the fabric of the genre for all time. It's very rare you can recognize a classic on your first viewing or even during your first viewing, but that's what happened for me here. Now, it's at number 9 for all time for me, and some people might wonder if I think it's one of the scariest films of all time, why isn't it higher on my list? Well, I'd point out that a film I think is actually scarier than this, The Haunting of Julia, is further down my list. I'm not doing a top 10 personal film list as the best films ever made, although I'm going to argue that my favorite film of all time is the best film ever made. But after that first film, it's about my enjoyment. I don't actually like comfort films anymore, whereas, I can watch that and I know every line of it. I'm kind of past that in my life. But films that, when I watch them, often retain all of their power, and there's a lot of them to come on this list, that's where the magic is. That's how I know a film really is speaking to me and still has a lot to say. It's the worst kind of truism to say that the best films are ones that you see new things in every time you watch them. But Ringu is a little bit different of experience every time I watch it, and I realized why. It's nothing that I'm missing when I'm watching the film. It's that every year I watch the film, I'm a little bit different of a person. And I find myself more distanced from, say, the bread and butter slasher films of the early 80s, because I'm not the guy I was when I first encountered those films and was just getting this kind of adrenaline kick, caffeine high off of watching a bunch of kids go into the woods and only one come out. I still like that stuff, but it doesn't speak to me the way it did when I was, 17. Ringu is a different story. Ringu, man, every time I watch it, I feel a little more moved, a little more shaken. It's the kind of film that gets better with multiple viewings. Amazing performances, a great score that no one discusses, a story that's as tight as can be. It's just perfect for what it is. For the Asian ghost thing, I don't think there's a better example, and I don't think there ever probably will, because this sets such a high bar that in order to leap over it, you're going to have to do something that's going to have to be mind-blowing in a way we don't even know how to describe yet. Because that's what this film did. We didn't know we wanted the perfect Asian ghost movie until we had it. And they've been chasing it ever since. There's been sequels, some of which are very good. I like Ring Zero Birthday quite a lot. I like Cairo. I like, there's a film called Ghost Taxi, if you haven't seen it, that I like quite a lot. But none of them really get all the way there. None of them really cross that bridge into the most dangerous, uncanny that this film does. This film gets its claws into you. And Sadako is not just a classic horror villain. She's one of the great monsters. She belongs in the discussion with Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, all the greats. Please tell me your experiences with Ringu. And do you think I'm just wrong? Do you think the American film is actually better than this? Oh my God, I hope you really don't believe that. But tell me in the comments. Oh, is there another version you like? Are you a big Ring Virus fan, or did you like the Ring, the Final Chapter television series, which I didn't like very much at all? But there's a lot of Ring material. It's a big universe. Even Rings. Did you like the film? Did you like the ideas but not the execution? That seems to be most people's gripe there. Leave a comment below.